Hello and welcome to the Global Church Project. I'm Graham Hill. Emmanuel Katongole is the child of Rwandan parents, one Hutu and the other Tutsi. Many of his writings focus on peace, forgiveness, reconciliation, and Christianity in the global south. He's passionate about the relationship between faith and theology, and peace and justice. Emmanuel Katongole is the author of many books on African theology, The Crisis of Faith Following the Rwandan Genocide, and Christian Approaches to Justice, Peace and Reconciliation. He's recently released a book called The Sacrifice of Africa, a political theology for Africa. Emmanuel Katongole, welcome to the Global Church Project.
Well, thank you for having me.
You've written extensively on the church in Africa and the church in Rwanda. And in your book, Mirror to the Church, you talk a lot about the kind of issues that the church is going through. What are some of the things that you're trying to get at in your work there?
Well, yes, in this book, Mirror to the Church, it's basically two things that I'm trying to get at in the Mirror to the Church. One is a question of identity, Christian identity, but through the lens of my own identity. And two, it's a question of the church. What is the church and what is the church's role in the world? But about identity, Mirror to the Church, in a way, was a way to kind of work out issues for me. And the story I tell, part of the story in Rwanda, in Mirror to the Church, was my parents migrated from Rwanda. I was born in Uganda, but my parents migrated from Rwanda. And one of them was Hutu, the other Tutsi. So the genocide in 1994, I began to ask the question, so who am I? Am I Hutu? Am I Tutsi? What would have happened to me if I'd been in Rwanda? But then that was also made more complex by where I was. I was at Duke Divinity School, teaching theology as a Catholic priest in a Methodist setting. I had started a Center for Reconciliation as a Catholic who was working not only with Protestants, but who had many of my friends were evangelical. And I was comfortable within that setting. So I started kind of reflecting on this question of identity, my own identity in a way. Am I Hutu? Am I Tutsi? Am I Ugandan? Am I Rwandan? I spent 6 years in Europe. Now I am in America, a Catholic Protestant university. So who am I? So the question of identity was coming up really for me. And so Mirror to the Church gave me an opportunity to work through those issues about identity and to discover that actually identity is not a stable thing. Identities get formed. That's when I realized that that was what was going on in Rwanda. That the people that had started off kind of speaking the same language, same culture, by 1994, they had become so polarized, antagonistic, Hutu and Tutsi, stable in their identities. And so I'm beginning to wonder, what's the role of Christian identity then? Is it just kind of to map itself over and above those identities? Or Christian identity is a formation of a new identity in the world? So that's what kind of connected the second element that I'm trying to work through, the question of the church. So what is the church then?
So before the Civil War, a very large percentage of the Rwandan population would have called themselves Christian. So what was going on for people in their sense of identity as they were being polarized into Hutu or Tutsi, as they were engaging in the Christian faith? What was going on in people's hearts and minds?
Yeah, Graham, that's one of the most painful events about Rwanda. Rwanda was, and still is, one of the most Christian nations in Africa, over 90% Christian. The church was flourishing, and during the genocide, the church's role within the genocide was very, very complex. It was the church was conflicted. The church participated in the genocide. People killed one another, Christians. So I'm saying, what is going on here? Then the more I kind of analyze the story, the more I realize that, well, the church just took these identities, Hutu and Tutsi, for granted. The church's evangelization of Rwanda happened around the same time that the colonialism was going on in Rwanda, and all these theories about Hutu and Tutsi. And the church just accepted that and just saw itself as kind of building onto these identities, the identities being the more stable backbone, if you like. And that's what I think made the church's role in the Rwandan genocide very, very negative, and kind of participating and people killing one another, Christians in the name of Hutu and Tutsi, as if Christianity didn't make any difference.
How did that struggle with identity, as manifested in a civil war, hold up a mirror to the global church, to Christianity today?
Because what I realized that Rwanda was not unique. In fact, actually, Rwanda was just reflecting forms of Christianity that we have lived everywhere in the West as well. And in fact, the story of Rwanda is just a reflection of the kind of Christianity that we understood, that was brought through the missionary presence. That Christianity does not really question whether it is tribe or nation, but it just kind of builds onto that. And so Rwanda now holds us, provides us with a mirror to begin to see, oh, this is what is going on within Christianity. If the church accepts whatever sociological or anthropological definitions and leaves those in place and just kind of tries to build onto that, then it's not different from what happened in Rwanda.
Well, actually, I read a study recently that was talking about some of the shifts in the millennial generation in the United States. And the term used to go God, family, and nation, I believe. But the study for the millennials in the United States suggests that they've reversed that order, that young Americans tend to think of themselves firstly in the context of family, then nationhood, and then God. So do you think it is a widespread problem that people identify themselves firstly with family and then with their tribalism, their nationhood, before they begin to think about, well, what does it mean to be the people of God?
I think that's given. I think that's the starting point. I think naturally people identify with family and then with a bigger community, whether it is town or city or nation or tribe, and then with God. I think that is the given. But to say that it is the given is not to say that that is how it ought to be. The revolutionary element that is introduced by Christianity is precisely to call that into question, to say, okay, this might be the starting point, but this is not the terminus adiquem. This is not where it is headed. The role of Christianity, in a way, is to begin to see that from this starting point, actually, the journey, the Christian journey, can begin to form a new identity that actually reformats, if you like, this whole sense of who are my people. I think, as I understand it, I think this is what the Christian journey is all about. To begin where we are, and then to kind of bring us to a new element and a new place where the sense of who my people are has been extended.
So it begins to make us think about what it means to be a pilgrim people who are an alternative people, who are identified with Christ and the kingdom of God, and who actually are part of a diverse mosaic of cultures and ethnicities. Is that the sort of thing that Rwanda begins to cause us to ask and look at more closely?
Exactly. After I worked with the Mirror to the Church, I started working more and more with the terminology that is provided by Andrew Wars, the Ephesian moment. I realized that in Andrew Wars, the missiologist Andrew Wars, describes what happens in the church of Ephesus, and that's what he's celebrating in the letter to the Ephesians, the coming together of people that would not normally come together. Jews and Gentiles coming together for the first time as a new people. And Paul celebrates that in the Ephesian letter, saying the dividing wall has been broken.
So when we look at what happened in Rwanda, how does it lift up a mirror to us about the brokenness of the church today?
Yes, the image that I've been using more and more lately is the image of the Ephesian moment, the fragments, that each fragment, we live in fragments, and each fragment thinks that it is the whole, and it can only think it is the whole by excluding the other. But what Andrew Wars writes about in the Ephesian moment is the coming together of the different fragments in the church in Ephesus. The dividing wall has been broken. The people who lived apart, and we are all, in a way, sojourners, journeying together, and only together. And the letter of the Ephesians says, only together can we manifest the full height of Christ's full stature. Only together. So the coming together of these fragments. People who would not normally come together, Jews and Gentiles, now they come together and have a meal for the first time. So for me, that's a very dynamic image of what the church is. That these different fragments, whether it is Hutu or Tutsi, black and white and Americans, there is a real possibility of coming together as a new people, as a new creation. And together, there can be a realization of that full stature that the letter of the Ephesians talks about. So eventually, for me, that is where Rwanda provides a mirror. That the genocide, in a way, reflects that kind of exclusion, that kind of refusal to even consider the other as part of who I am. And Rwanda is very very good as a mirror in that it kind of provides in a way a radical expression of that exclusion. Even though, as we know, many in Rwanda are intermarried. There's so much intermarriage. And actually, the exclusion of the other is just an exclusion of oneself, but in so many ways.
When you look at Rwanda today, where do you see signs of hope and embrace? Where do you see that people have tried to bring healing and reconciliation and peacemaking? What are some examples, some stories?
Well, there are lots of stories coming out of Rwanda that actually show the hope, if you like, the hope that there is. But even before I talk for the moment, at the present, you need to go back even within the genocide time. There are so many stories that in a way bring out, exemplify, if you like, this hope. One story that I work with is a story of the Nyamirambo community, which is a Muslim community. A Muslim community. That's surprising. Now, this Muslim community was one of the only few that did not divide according Hutu and Tutsi. So there in the Muslim community, lives were saved. And the reason? The Muslims did not identify as Hutu and Tutsi. Their identity as Muslim was far higher and deeper than Hutu and Tutsi. Now, for me, that provides a radical mirror to what the church is called to be. But there are other stories within the genocide of people who refused to separate and were killed. So those also provide very lively examples and mirror to what the church is called to be. Now, on my recent visit to Rwanda, I visited also some communities where you can see something like that. Victims who are now working with perpetrators of the genocide in the fields, they're working together, they are rebuilding homes together, and their families, in a way, are working together, kind of really providing a sense of how the future looks like. So stories like this, for me, provide not only a sense of hope, but also a sense of direction to what the church is called to be.
In your work on the sacrifice of Africa, you look at some of the endemic problems that Africa faces today. Can you describe some of those, and what is your analysis of why these problems persist?
So first of all, in the future for Africa, I'm dealing with some of the problems, the endemic problems: HIV/AIDS, poverty, ethnicity, tribalism, war, violence, dictatorship in Africa. And actually, that work, A Future for Africa, is full of frustration for me. What's going on in Africa? Why can't these things change? Why are they so endemic? And I kind of explore the different strategies that have been used to kind of bring hope in Africa in the midst of all that. And I realized that this is kind of like an endless cycle. The problems persist. So that's where I end with this observation that these problems are not just incidental problems. They are kind of wired within the imaginative landscape of Africa.
In The Sacrifice of Africa, you talk about how some of these problems speak to the way in which culture and ethnicity and other issues are wired into the African setting. Can you describe what do you mean by wired and how do you see evidence of this?
Well, a part of it was trying to get a sense to why these issues are endemic, why they don't seem to go away, in spite of the very many strategies that have been tried. And then begin to see something about the political history. I think that is something that many people don't pay attention to, the social history. Now, a social history, in a way, is built on an imagination. So I work with this notion of the social imagination and the social imaginary, and how history, in a way, not only assumes a number of ideas, but also works with the stories in a way that are translated into the imagination and then become the framework within which politics, economics, culture is arranged. So that's what I call the whole process of the social imagination. That in a way is the way that some of the notions that we work with are wired within that landscape. So looking at the story of Africa, for example, I began to realize that Africa's inception into modernity is connected with a number of assumptions and stories about Africa that assume that Africa is always at war, that Africa is endemically tribal, and these tribes are always at war with one another, that assume that Africa is not wanted, that Africa is discarded in a way from the whole process. Even as it tries in a way to provide programs for whether it is colonialism or development, there is a sense in which the inception of Africa within modernity speaks about a certain kind of rejection of Africa. And how these, in a way, are translated not only into the colonial project that only uses Africa for exploitation and mineral resources, but also that is translated into the post-colonial project. Post-colonial leaders just took over a game in a way that was already set, if you like, through this process of social imagination, but never really changed the game. And so kind of we work within that imaginary landscape. So in The Sacrifice of Africa, what I'm trying to do is a kind of a social analysis of the social history of Africa and going back into the kind of stories and political formation that makes tribalism, poverty, corruption such endemic issues in Africa.
How does the Christian story and narrative provide a counter-narrative to that social imagination, the story of Africa?
Yeah, first of all, what I try to do also in The Sacrifice of Africa, again to say, where is Christianity in all this? What difference does Christianity make? And then I saw through my analysis that actually Christianity is very present, real in Africa. But most of the time, the church's response to the social problems assumes these social problems as given. And so the church tries to help either by being a kind of a pious intervention, the formation of one's soul and spirit, which is great, which is needed, or a pastoral agent to bring help to those who are suffering, which is great, which is needed, or the role of advocacy, changing for government, elections, and so forth, which is great, which is needed, but it does not change the fundamental imagination. It does not change the fundamental story into which Africa operates. And so I begin to say, but is that all the church can do? Or can the church, in a way, also dare to reinvent the story into which Africa is incorporated? So that's what I'm trying to
So
push.
we kind of retreat into some very well-worn strategies, don't we? Whether it's, you say, firefighting, or addressing injustice, or personal conversion, or pastoral care.
Yeah, humanitarian care,
But you're saying that actually the church needs to get a bit more brave and deal with some of the entrenched narratives.
Yeah, I think the church's primary role in the world, in Africa in particular, is to provide a new story within which we can see ourselves, within which we can understand who we are, and within which we can see the world, and therefore live in that world. That is, I think, in my opinion, the main gift that the Christianity, the church brings to Africa. And so I began excited. Once I discovered that, I began to be excited and say, wow, this is great. But where? Is there anything like this happening where in Africa? Where? And that's where I kind of get into the stories that I end with in the sacrifice of Africa. The stories of people like Bishop Taban in the Sudan, of Angelina Cham in northern Uganda, of Maggie Barankisi. I begin to see, wow, it is actually something like this reinvention of Africa that is at stake here.
Well, I know my listeners love listening to stories.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us one of those stories?
Well, I can tell you the story, for example, of Maggie Barankisi from Burundi. She witnessed genocide in 1993. She had raised the orphans. She herself is Tutsi, and she had raised the 7 kids orphaned, 4 of them Hutu and 3 Tutsi. Now, when ethnic war broke out in Burundi, the Hutu came and killed members of her family. The following day, the Tutsi took revenge. And Maggie, because she had these 7 kids, Hutu and Tutsi, went and hid in the bishop's place. Her family came and killed 73 people in the bishop's residence. And they tied Maggie down on a chair and said, the punishment that we're going to give you is to watch. So they started killing everyone in her sight. But her children, fortunately, ran and hid in the sacristy. And so after the massacre, she's in the church, in the chapel, crying. And then the kids come out and say, Mama, we are here, we are saved. They didn't kill us. And then Maggie realizes there that that is her role, her call, is to form a new generation of children who are beyond Hutu and Tutsi, but whose primary identity is being God's children, beloved. And so she started this ministry of Mezo Shalom, of raising children in a new identity of love. And she has now raised over 30,000 children. She's built them schools, farms, a cinema, a swimming pool in Burundi. And you might focus on the projects and the hospital and the schools, but she says, no, those are not the it. The it is the new identity into which we are called as God's children, founded on the story of love. Now, a story like that, I think I realize that this is beyond the pastoral care for orphans. This is beyond being pious. This is beyond just advocacy, change of government. This is actually rewriting a new story in Burundi, founded on a new identity. This is kind of reinventing the future. So it's stories like this that I kind of work with that kind of really show the future into which we are called, but that is really grounded within the Christian story of love. Something like that.
You're doing some work on Lament and Hope at the moment as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something about what that work is about?
Yeah. You know, in my work, it's one thing that leads to another. As I said, when I was working with the Future for Africa, I came to the conclusion that these issues are wired within Africa's landscape. So that led to the Sacrifice of Africa, where I tried to unpack that and so on. Now, toward the end of the Sacrifice of Africa, as I began to work with these stories, whether it is the Mama Angelina whose daughter was abducted and she led a movement of forgiveness, or Maggie, I began to realize that what makes these activists unique is the way in which they live within the intersection of lament and hope, of pain and hope. That was kind of really surprising. And say, so what is this? So I began to kind of read more and to try to do more research around that. And then I realized that actually from within the Christian tradition, lament and hope go hand in hand. That there is no hope without lament. To the extent that we quickly jump on hope, we live with the shallow visions of hope. Christian hope is really grounded in lament, of course. Resurrection cannot happen without Good Friday.
Yeah.
So then again to kind of do work with some of these stories and some of these leaders to see how they live at that intersection of lament and hope. For example, the story of Maggie that I have just told is one of the most impressive stories of hope coming out of Africa. But it's so grounded in lament that you cannot understand Maggie without lament. Not only the beginning, not only the beginning when she is crying after the massacre in the church, that kind of gives her the call, but all the programs that she is doing, they are grounded in lament. And I give you one story, one example. Every time a visitor goes to this village, they are just blown away what Maggie has done for the children in this village. I mean, a swimming pool in Burundi. There are only 2 swimming pools in Burundi. And one of them is at this beautiful Belgian resort hotel in Bujumbura. The other one, you guessed right, in this village, nowhere, in the middle of nowhere for these children. So it's surprising. And so when you visit, you cannot be but impressed. Brand new hospital, amazing. Theater, bank, radio station. So you want to go around and say, oh, show me, how have you done this? And you know what she does? She says, let's go back to the beginning. She takes you to the gravesite where she buried the 72 people. And of course, as she tells the story, she's crying and everybody's crying. So I asked her, why do you do that? Why don't you just explain what happened and then show what you've done? Her answer, Father Emmanuel, I have to go back to the graveside so that I can see the future clearly. I have to go back to the graveside in order to see the future clearly. Wow. She's saying that without standing on the ground of lament, you cannot see the future clearly. So all these programs, every day is grounded within that story of lament, of standing on the graveside. But then, even more important, she adds, as soon as I finish that, I'm so exhausted, I spend 2 hours in the chapel reflecting and looking at the cross. At the cross, the story of lament. That is where, at the story of the cross, the story of the genocide makes sense or gets taken up into a bigger story of lament and hope.
I think this is such an important lesson for us in the West as well. I think we've got to a stage where we're not good at mourning or lamenting. We're kind of soaked in a triumphalism in Christianity as well as in the broader culture. So do you see that this has important lessons for the way in which the church in the West understands itself and relates to the intersection between lament and hope today?
Huge implications, huge lessons. The church is invited into this journey of lament and hope. Lament and hope going hand in hand. To the extent that we avoid lament, as I said, we live in a shallow visions of hope, which actually are not hope, but forms of optimism, that things will be better, but that are not grounded in lament. So the challenge, of course, that many people have written about the West, the inability, for example, to stand on the ground of pain. So I think many people have captured that sentiment that in the West, it's very difficult to live in lament. We avoid the Psalms of lament, even though a whole third of the Psalms are all Psalms of lament. We sing songs of praise, but not songs of lament. So there's been plans that have been, in a way, written about the way we try to avoid lament. For me, the challenge is, how do we recover practices of lament? And part of it is why I started this program of the pilgrimage of pain and hope, where invite people to journey with me to Africa, 2 weeks in places of pain, as I tell the stories of pain, but also the stories of hope. My goal is to, in a way, educate and try to form people into these practices of lament, and pilgrimage being one of those practices. So when we started the Center for Reconciliation at Duke Divinity School, I said we need to write within the programs of the center a pilgrimage. And so in the pilgrimage, we go to places of brokenness. For example, Baltimore, Virginia, Durham, where there's so much divide, racial divide. So in a way, what I'm trying to encourage is these kind of practices, like pilgrimage, that bring the church, the community, into places of brokenness, so that we can begin to learn to stand in the places of brokenness. And to the extent that we learn that, in a way, we begin to see the brokenness of our own lives, and not to lie about the brokenness of our own lives. And then the painful, slow, painful journey of hope begins.
How does confession and repentance relate to lament and hope?
Confession is key to lament. Part of the lament is realizing that it's not only they who are the problem. I'm the problem. So it kind of really it comes to a deep sense of acceptance of who we are broken. And confession is really about that. I tell you a story that actually for me captures this very well. So we are in northern Uganda with a group of students, some from Duke that I brought on this pilgrimage of pain and hope. And we are in an internally people's displaced camp, IDP. Very painful. All these kids that have been displaced, they come. And so I'm talking to the priest about his work there. And I see one of my students goes off to the side, and she's surrounded by kids. And then I see that she's moving to back to the bus. So as soon as I finish this, I go to see what is happening. I find her crying in the bus. I say, what's the problem? Of course, she doesn't want to talk about it, so I give her time. And towards the end of the pilgrimage, she says, "Thank you for bringing me to Gulu, northern Uganda. Gulu saved my life." I said, "What do you mean?" Because as the kids came around me, I started telling each one of them that you are made in God's image. You are beloved. And then she realizes, she said, I never really believed that about me. Of course, I grew up everybody saying, oh, you are special and so forth, but I never really believed that about me. And here I am, Divinity School, preparing to be a pastor, but I had never really believed that sense about me. And it just broke me down. I began to see all my limitations, inadequacies, but really to realize that I am beloved. So in a way, she was, for the first time, accepting herself in her brokenness, but also receiving herself as a gift that she is. That is confession to me. That is really receiving that painful but yet delightful gift of being beloved, of being God's children. There is no way that we do accept that without the admission of we are broken, we are limited. Confession.
How does our new identity help us to be people who are engaged in reconciliation and peacemaking today?
Well, it makes all the difference. First of all, I think, Graham, you have to understand that when Chris and I wrote Reconciling All Things, that was the start of the Center for Reconciliation. We decided to do book projects where we bring together theologians and practitioners to work together on a book. And we said, let's begin by writing together this book, Reconciling All Things. We had seen so much interest in reconciliation. As we told people that we are going to do a program in reconciliation, people said, great, we need work here in Durham. You need to reconcile these people. You need to bring peace to Iraq. There was so much that was required in a way. And the excitement was about you're going to bring specific skills and techniques of how to do it. And then we became dissatisfied because we realized there's so much focus on technique, on skills. And we said, but reconciliation is a story. It is not our story. It is a story of what God is doing in the world. And so our very first attempt is we need to relocate this notion of reconciliation back into the Christian story where it belongs. It is not so much about techniques and skills. If you focus so much on techniques and skills, in the end, it doesn't make a difference whether you're Christian or not. So we really wanted to recapture that sense of that this is a Christian story. And so we began with that text of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. And when Christ, new creation, then reconciliation is really about that new creation. And all this is from God, a gift. So before we jump into what should we do, it's about receiving. And this is what God has been doing. God has been reconciling that ongoing journey that God himself is the one reconciling the world to himself in Christ. Wow. So how do we take time? How do we step back from this immediate activism into receiving that gift, into realizing that it is God's mission? So for us, that is where it begins. To think about peace building, peacemaking in the world begins with that sense of the story, with that sense of, wow, this is what God is doing, and God has already realized it in Christ. But how do we receive the gift? How do we live into that gift? So that's what we're trying to do in that small book, Reconciling All Things. Kind of locate the journey of reconciliation back into the Christian story. And now, from within there, then you can think about, what does that mean for us Christians? The sense of journey. And so we work with that sense of reconciliation as a journey, and involving 5 things, 5 gifts, or 5 questions. The first question, if you want to talk about reconciliation toward what? What's the goal? And the gift there is the new creation. That is where it is headed. Whenever you think about reconciliation, think about new creation. The second question, okay, if it's a journey, where am I standing? What is going on right here? And the gift is lament. Wherever you're standing, it's this ground of brokenness. And how do you stand in that ground of brokenness? That is where the whole notion and discipline of lament, in a way, helps us to stand within places of brokenness, within the brokenness of our own lives, as we journey into this gift. Third question, what does hope look like? If Isaiah promises that God is always making something new, see, I'm doing a new thing, what does it look like in places like the south side of Chicago, in places like Rwanda? So how do we learn, if you like, to tell the story of hope? Fourth question, but what needs to be done? What should we do now? That's a question of advocacy. What is needed? You see, it's just the fourth question. It's not the beginning. It's the fourth question. What do we need to do now? Reconciliation involves work. And the fifth question, but how do you sustain the journey for the long haul? The spirituality, the gifts that in a way keep you going when the going is tough. Otherwise, there's no way that journey can be sustained. So we kind of work with that kind of framework of 5 gifts, or 5 disciplines, or 5 questions to kind of to show what is involved in the journey for not only the experts, the peacemakers, but for anyone who is in Christ, for every Christian. This is the journey onto which we are called.
How does all of this shape your understanding of the mission of the church and how the church engages in that mission today?
Within that story of reconciliation of God, reconciling the world to himself, the church is very much needed. The church is at the heart of it. First of all, as the recipient of that gift, the church receives the gift of reconciliation. The church's first mission is to be the recipient of that gift. Oh, we are reconciled. We are a reconciled people. We are a forgiven people. It's not as easy as it sounds to receive the gift, of forgiveness. Many times we want to be the agents of reconciliation, the agents of forgiveness. But to receive the forgiveness, to be the forgiven people, that's not easy. But that's the church's first place, that we are the beneficiaries of this incredible, undeserved gift, God's reconciliation, God's forgiveness. To be that. So that's the first role. That is the first call of the church, to be the recipient of that gift. The second dimension of that, to be the agent. It's only towards the end of that passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20, that then Paul talks about being ambassadors of reconciliation. Only later on does he talk about mission. After he has spent so many words talking about the gift, then he talks about the mission, for the church to be the agent of that reconciliation. So the way I capture that is that the church is both the sign and the sacrament of that reconciliation in the world. It's a sign that you can begin to see something of a forgiven people, how forgiven people live, how forgiven people worship, how forgiven people relate to one another, but also become the sacrament in a way, and the agent and the catalyst of that gift in the world. So it's kind of that kind of, in a way, tension of being the recipients at the one time, but also being the agents. That's the role of the church. That's the mission of the church in the world, as I understand it.
When you hear people talk about your work, could be students or faculty, or when you read reviews of some of the things that you've written, what do you think is most misunderstood about what you're saying?
What is it mostly?
Do you ever read something and think, no, they really haven't understood what I'm getting at?
Yeah. I think the most misunderstood aspect is that when people, for example, read Reconciling All Things, people come to it and say, okay, we are going to get some techniques and skills from here. And they leave like, but you haven't addressed the challenges. The world is burning. We need the peacemakers in Iraq, in the Middle East, ISIS, in Africa. We need skills. It's not time to kind of waste our time stepping back, theological reflection. What we need is the water and the water hoses, the houses on fire. So they kind of feel kind of frustrated that I don't provide the techniques of how to do
because you say that
reconciliation.
Stepping back is not running away from the problem, but it's actually engaging with the core problems.
Yeah, and at times it is actually reframing the whole problem so that you can see it more clearly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we've been living with fire hoses and trying to put out the fires and so forth and so on. But unless you begin to ask the questions, why are these fires endemic? You cannot get into the deeper problems. You could be very active and very busy, but you're not going to get into the deeper problem. The deeper problems is that we live within deformed imaginations. We live within deformed imaginations and social realities. Those are the ones that need to be reinvented. And the power, as I understand it, the power of the Christian story is that it provides ways in which we begin to, in a way, reinvent the social realities in which we live through new narrative framework that gives us new possibilities of living and working in the world. So I think people become just impatient. They say, we're looking for techniques. We're looking for techniques, But what I'm trying to provide is a kind of even what I think is a better way of engaging the realities of peace, of brokenness in the world, by kind of getting into the deeper issues.
Is there anything else you want to say to us today?
I just want to say that this is a great opportunity to be able to talk about
Thank
my
you for
work.
Being with us.
I appreciate you taking the time. Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining us at the Global Church Project.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The Global Church Project is located at www.theglobalchurchproject.com. On our website you'll find a wide range of interviews and resources for colleges, universities and churches. I look forward to your company next time. From me, goodbye.